All right, cool. So take two. So I'm Surfer Dave. We're talking about pen testing off the grid and the Middle Pacific. It's just some of my experiences living in Hawaii on my father's farm with literally no running water, sewage, electricity, any of those things, and how it really applies to us. Like if you're doing penetration testing or any type of testing at all, like how do you actually do this with very limited resources? Like I mentioned before, 14-year-old Dave can tell you a little bit about who I am. I'm not big on bios.
What are we doing? We're recording.
Okay, my name is Gatekeeper. It's my alias name. I'm an anarchist. I don't know if you can hear that, but my alias is Gatekeeper when I was 14, and I'm an anarchist. So a little bit about me. This is actually building explosives in my mom's basement. So just talk about a little bit how I came to live off the grid, what my lab setup really kind of looked like, and then tools and techniques I used for making sure my testing was accurate, and then also talk a little bit about how to be sustainable from living and working from a foreign country. So I got some pictures. And it was a real working farm, my dad's farm in Hawaii. Oh God, I can't see any of this. So picture time. So I didn't really want to do an actual technical talk, so we're going to look at pictures instead. So Hawaii is a very unique place to live. We grew a lot of different things. Amazingly, you find in the restaurants what you can't get on the mainland or being shipped from the mainland over to Hawaii becomes a really good crop. Beets, in this particular case, we grew beets for restaurants. They use it in coloring for different ice creams, and they use it pretty much across the island now that it's been introduced to Hawaii. Tomatoes do not grow in Hawaii for the most part unless they're that size. There's a specific insect. So you're looking at $5.99 for tomatoes per pound in Hawaii. So that was actually a good crop to have, and we had this in an enclosure that would keep that insect out. Mangoes, I would make mango chutney and put it in jars, and we'd go sell it at the market. Lots of different herbs and things like that you pretty much could throw anything out in the ground in Hawaii and it'll grow. Aquaponics, I got aquaponics set up and running to do lettuce. It's much easier to do lettuce and things like that in an aquaponics setup really fast. We're looking at, that's probably only a day's, maybe a day and a half worth growth, and you can have a harvest every week before farmer's market. Hunting, what most people don't realize is Hawaii is a sport hunting ground. There's introduced wild pigs and deer and things like that, so you can actually hunt all those things, especially up on the farm. That was the view from the deck. That's Pearl Harbor and Honolulu in the background there. So that was the view from the farm. And that's the view of the road going up. So the farmhouse is right here where the cursor is. And that is all national forest behind there on the Waianae Range. So you're pretty much able to hike and camp and do whatever you need to back there. So it's an amazing place to live. That's the farmhouse. And the interesting part about living on this farm was these rocks were pretty much everywhere. And you see there's nothing built next to them. That's because they have Hawaiian hieroglyphs. This area was actually part of the Damani pineapple plantation, and they found these Hawaiian hieroglyphs on these rocks, and the Hawaiian Historical Society basically, if you find that on your property, you're not able to do anything within a quarter mile, and then you have to allow people to be able to come up and study those ruins. And then a lot of peacocks everywhere. I don't know if you've ever heard peacocks before. They're pretty annoying. And then chickens, there's chickens everywhere on the islands. One part of the farm, they do cockfighting. I mean, obviously that's illegal. but you'd have anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 roosters and hens, which you can imagine that noise up there. But sometimes working conditions would be nicer. Go to Waikiki Beach, and I'm using a similar hotspot there to do some testing that day. I just didn't feel like being at the farm, and anything's portable pretty much in Hawaii. Fishing was the order of the day, so we'll get into my schedule a little bit later on, but if you like ahi tuna, get down to the beach about 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon and dive, and you can actually have fresh fish every single night. So that's just a few pictures, anyway. Show and tell. So basically my lab is very simple there. Honda EU generators, if you ever think of wanting to work in a condition off the grid and you wanted something pretty quiet where you could still have business meetings, it's a very quiet generator, very efficient, and a UPS to back everything up. Now in Hawaii, up until just recently, had one of the best implementations of WiMAX. So I was actually able to get about 7 meg. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, but compared to most other internet connections on the island, that was very quick. So I had a directional Yagi antenna with a high output modem using Clear Communications. Now Sprint bought Clear Communications, and because people were using all the data, they shut them down. So they're forcing people to get landline connections, which means I'd have to go to using something like T-Mobile now. I had an on-premise ESX server, and part of one of the projects I was working on was actually testing, doing some QA testing on hardware where I was using virtual machines to pass things back and forth. So that would only be used for lab and testing purposes, not really anything over the wire. And this laptop, basically, which 32 gig memory, and you can pretty much do everything inside the box itself. So you can imagine that testing via WiMAX, and I know actually from satellite services like Hughes and DirecTV that you're going to have crazy amounts of latency. You want to talk about an interpreter shell that just will not function whatsoever. Try doing it with something with that latency, especially over a satellite type of communication. So for me, the most important tool was using virtual private servers, VPSs. And there's some pricings there. DigitalOcean is one I use more often than not. It's like $5 a month. You can spin things up and down pretty quickly and handle most tasks. And we'll just walk through, like looking at how DigitalOcean kind of looks, how you can create things and destroy things. It's really, really fast. Linode's $10 a month. They give you twice as much as what DigitalOcean. I use DigitalOcean because it's more cost effective there, and you pretty much get what you need to get done there. And then heavier lifting. So say you're doing an engagement, that you're doing anything, run and responder, things that you're pulling hashes off the wire, any kind of brute forcing, or if you're running something like Scapy for fuzzing, Amazon AWS, you can actually scale that pretty large, but your cost also scales with that as well. So not all VPSs are the same. So the different types of things I did out there would be white box engagements, or engagements where I had the customers, they'd give me the entire layout of their network or their website or their mobile application for testing. But one thing that is important if you're doing black box testing or you're doing a red team engagement is being able to test the effectiveness of their defensive side or their blue team against these things. So with DigitalOcean, it's very easy to set up a box, create a snapshot of that box, and then deploy it from places all around the world. So you can come from multiple different IPs. And then if they start looking at DigitalOcean IP space, you can switch over to Linode pretty quickly, and it gives you a lot more options to obfuscate your traffic. Now, sometimes you're going to have to do testing that requires, low latency when you're doing web testing, especially when you're talking about automated scanning and enumeration. So you can actually implement with DigitalOcean and Linode, which are fully headless, command line only services. get KDE with the VNC connection working. Now I say kind of working. It's basically only used, really, I only used it for automated scanning, where I could press a button and let it go and come back and pick up results. Because you imagine a VNC connection over that speed is pretty slow. And then use the SOX proxy, so SSH into your VPS solution, and you can pretty much come from anywhere in the world from IP space. And I didn't know how technical to make this talk, so the screen command, if anyone's ever familiar with the screen command, if you're on like a PuTTY session or SSH session, you can use screen to basically drop your console, and it'll continue running in the background. And I'll just show that real quick as well. So let's just pop in here and see how well this goes, because I happen to kind of look sideways because my laptop's not functioning the way I'd like it to. So this is the command console for DigitalOcean, and it's very, very easy to use. Create a droplet here, and you can see some of the pricing there, and you can really scale upwards depending on your needs there. And they do charge per hour, which is nice. So like if you had to spin something up for a couple hours and then destroy it, it allows you to do that. And I'll reiterate the importance of that when I show you another tool that I use. Multiple different regions you can select from, and then whatever type of Linux that you're really familiar with. I'm a Debian person myself, so using Debian was pretty easy. Now, is anyone familiar with Armitage? It's in the Kali distro. Anyone familiar with Cobalt Strike? Cobalt Strike is the granddaddy of Armitage, and Raphael Mudge just redesigned it. It was re-released at DerbyCon, version 3.0. The problem with Armitage, the fact that it wraps Nmap around it, it wraps interpreter or Metasploit around it, all those different things, you have a problem with the Wassenaar kind of agreement that just was, if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, I'm not sure, but it's basically these types of tools cannot be exported to other countries. So Raphael basically took all that functionality out, rewrote how the way Cobalt Strike works. So, God, that's going to be impossible to read. So I just want to fire that up and just show you briefly. You guys can't see any of that anyway. All right, so I'm in the Cobalt Strike directory, and then I'll just run the screen command. Okay, so that basically sets it up so that I can drop out of this PuTTY connection or SSH, and that team server will still be up and running. It's very similar to the way Armitage works as far as a team server. And Armitage works just fine. I just happen to have and pay for a copy of Cobalt Strike because it's much more advanced red teaming exercises. So I'll launch. I can't even see. So this is why you don't do live demos, by the way. And yes, that is a legitimate password, so if anyone wants to hook up with their Cobalt Strike server, feel free. The beauty about using VPSs to do these types of things is that really quickly you can set them up and destroy them, and there's a secure scrub feature with Linode as well as DigitalOcean. So if you're using these for actual engagements, you're able to do the job, destroy the data, or retrieve the data that you need and destroy it really quickly. One note is to make sure you disclose that you're going to be using a third-party cloud service before you take on any of these projects. A lot of companies don't want you using something out of another country. All right, so that's spun up. There we go.
Has DigitalOcean ever expressed any interest in wanting to be notified about running engagements from their infrastructure?
The question is, has DigitalOcean ever wanted to be notified about engagements? Yes. I generally notify them if something's coming from an IP. For the most part, they won't say anything unless someone comes back to them and says, there's this malicious attack coming from the IP space. And the one thing about DigitalOcean too is that if you have like 20 boxes, they give you a limit. If you call them up and say, hey, I'm doing penetration testing, they're like, all right, we'll give you 100 more, the capability to do 100 more boxes. So they don't really check a lot of that stuff. And
they don't have any sort of form or nothing?
There's no form or anything.
Just call them courtesy and they're cool with it?
Yep. Yep. An email. The same with Linode and Daemon VPS. Amazon,
What was the third one?
Daemon VPS. Similar pricing to DigitalOcean as far as how that runs. I've been using DigitalOcean, and the snapshot feature is really, really good. So Cobalt Strike, the cool thing about Cobalt Strike is, and using DigitalOcean is I can set up 20 different IPs or 20 different boxes with the same snapshot, run Cobalt Strike Team Server, and it has a feature called a beacon. The beacon is malleable so that it can.
Here.
Oh, here we go. Thank you, sir. Read my mind. So it's malleable so that when you're doing anything that's testing really the blue team's capability for detection, it can send out at random intervals small pieces of data. So you might have a half meg go to Singapore, another half meg go somewhere in New York. So you're really hammering down. And unfortunately, the blue team where I work now says it's completely unfair because there's no way we could possibly detect it. And I'm like, sorry, I'm a red teamer. I don't know how to fix that for you. All right. If anyone wants to pull up a little bit on Cobalt Strike, I don't want to say that I did anything to help out with that other than bother Mudge when there's issues. I really enjoy using the tool. I think it's underutilized in a lot of bigger organizations. So if anyone wants to talk about that or Armitage afterwards, I've done classes on that for a long time. So I could talk about it forever. But we'll keep it light. Okay. So some of the other implications for living off the grid in another nation. Hawaii is another country, whether or not they call themselves a state. I lived in Texas as well, and you can't tell them that they're part of the United States. It's the Republic of Texas. But in Texas, they allow lots of guns, and they'll shoot you. Or in Hawaii, it's pretty impossible to even get there's no such thing as concealed carry. It takes about 8 days to actually get your gun registered. They're pretty conservative or liberal about their gun laws. Another factor that you really have to take in, and this goes for any nation, is the time zone difference. And it's 10 hours behind Greenwich Mean Time. So like if you're wanting to start work on the East Coast time, you have something to present. Getting up at 2 o'clock to get the generator up, internet stable. If you have an ESX server that you need to get running so that you can make an 8 o'clock meeting, it's pretty tough. And it's interesting that many people start their work days like this in Hawaii. It's very common for people to live by the sun. My sister gets up at 3:30. She starts working at 5, done pretty early. So the cool thing about that is that once I'm done around noon, I can have the rest of the day to go to the beach, surf or dive or whatever, something like that. Yeah, so you're finished work around noon, which is really nice. But generally speaking, a lot of people are in bed by 8, which is kind of different from anything here on the mainland. So how does this apply to us, right? Like, I live in Charlotte now I work for a big organization there. Where do you want to work? Like, I work in a cube farm, like part of the time. I still actually have to work off that because where I'm at, I'm supposed to be attacking the outside of the network, but I'm sitting inside. So my boss will be here later, and you can ask him why we're still inside. He'll be giving the last presentation in this room. He doesn't know either. So where do you want to be? I imagine myself in another foreign country. Hawaii is very expensive, very difficult place to live at times, and I was thinking, like, I've got a cousin that runs his entire animation studio out of the Dominican Republic. And I mean, his house is paid for like $800 a month, and he's got like a live-in person that does all the cooking for them and like everything else. So like, that sounds like a lot better to me. So just depending on where you want to work, you can take some of these things away. And I mean, anyone that's doing any pen testing and red teaming really can tell you more about using VPSs to kind of host those things, because you don't want your IP at home attacking the internet, like, you know, oops, I mass scanned the internet and now I don't have internet because they've shut me down type things. That's a true story. Anyone familiar with Soldier of Fortran, the guy that's mainframe 767? He tells that story in his talk. I work with him now, and basically he was on the internet for like 4 days after clearing out some legal things after mass scanning the entire internet. So why move back? I mean, obviously I'm not in Hawaii anymore. It's hard work. I mean, it's manual labor, not only doing your normal day-to-day life, which you would think is pretty simple. You get up and go to the bathroom in the morning. You have lights. You have running water. Like we had porta-johns and composting toilets. You wanted to take a shower. You went and got rain catchment water, heated it up. So it was very much, you know, a difficult thing. And basically, like, I was lazy, really. I mean, I've missed all the first world problems everyone has. Like, you know, oh, the power's out. Now I can't finish playing Fallout 4 this afternoon or something like that. But I had the opportunity to join a red team, so that was the main thing. And I actually started trying to generate a buzz about the security community. We actually got BSides Hawaii approved to get rolling. Problem is there's no security community in Hawaii. ISSA is about it. And the people that I know there, Jim Manico, he's a big OWASP guy. He works, forget where he works now. Can't remember.
He works at Breakman Product.
Okay. Yeah, because Jeremiah Grossman's out there too. He works for White Hat. Yeah, so the people that are out there that do security, they have to travel to get away from there. I met a guy a couple weeks ago, and he's like, yeah, we were just trading stories about him. I'm like, well, what do you do for work? He's like, I travel. I'm like, well, why live in Hawaii? It's so far out there. I mean, if you have to travel all the time. And we looked at living off the, getting off of the farm, moving into an apartment, but it does really consume your time. The cost of living is exponential out there. Just the studio apartment we were looking at, that was probably about 5 miles from the beach, was something like $3,500. A lot of people work 2 jobs and they live with their entire family. Like, it's not uncommon for an entire family, like multiple generations, to be living in the same house in Hawaii. And I always would say, came back here because I had this opportunity, but you can't eat paradise. I just didn't have any money really just doing this remote stuff, at least not enough to really enjoy myself out in Hawaii. So I asked my wife when I was, getting this talk set up, what the pros and cons for her were. It was amazing to have access to the ocean and mountains at the same time, and it's literally year-long activities. And one of the downfalls of year-long activities of being outside with hardly any clothes on is that you have to keep a nice body, which I obviously have let go after leaving there. So there's all kinds of stuff to do around, very much an outdoors place. Some of the cons: anytime you had to get anywhere, the traffic it's the second worst in the U.S. behind L.A. One accident can block things. My mom actually had. One of the Army guys took a crane down the road. He knocked down one of the supports on one of the bridges. It took her 14 hours to get 20 miles around that. There's just no other roads to get around there. So traffic can be a nightmare, and a single accident can ruin your entire evening. So like getting onto the other side, it should take an hour. Sometimes it would take 3. And you have all these military people around on the island too. So you have a lot of foreign drivers that aren't used to what we call island time over there, where everyone's driving really slow, 45 miles an hour. The military's not used to driving that speed. So rush hour ended up being a nightmare. And I mentioned the prices before. We found a single lemon one time. We were wanting to make Mexican. Like, if you like Mexican food, you're not going to find it in Hawaii unless you want it canned or something like that. But like a single lemon was $2. I was like, what? So pretty bad. And the last one there, cane spiders. I was trying to find the picture of that, but on the outhouse, the cane spider is about this big. And if you're in the fields where the sugar cane is growing, they can be like this big. If you drive in Kauai, they'll jump across the road in front of your car. And so we were living on a farmhouse without really any kind of, it wasn't sealed or anything like that. And we didn't have any AC or anything. So you'd wake up with cane spiders on your bed or something like that. My wife was not too happy about it. I wasn't either, but yeah, so this is my wife's notes on that. And I mentioned before, trying to start a consulting business. The ISSA meetings, I mentioned giving a talk off of a Nexus device. The guy from, I don't know, I think he got a trip to Hawaii to speak at the ISSA meeting. He didn't show up at the ISSA meeting. And the guy's like, anyone have a talk that they can give? And I'm like, sure. Here's how to break Microsoft Great Plains via SQL. And everyone's like, I had no idea that was even a thing. Because all the talks there are about vendor talks and things like that. And, they work remote. There's a ton of travel to have to deal with. So visiting Hawaii, I totally recommend visiting Hawaii. And I'm talking mainly about Oahu. Oahu is the business center of Hawaii. Unless you want to be surrounded by Japanese and Filipino tourists, don't stay in Waikiki. There's some better places that I can go into that. And understand that there is a rich, proud culture alive and well in Hawaii. The royal nation of Hawaii just took over Kapiolani Palace like a couple months ago. They'll go and try and do a coup every so often. And the police are like, oh, let them go live in the palace for a couple days and we'll go kick them back out again. It's pretty, it's almost comical. Not to them, but to everyone watching the news. I learned a few phrases in Pidgin. Hawaiian Pidgin is a mix of all kinds of different languages together. It's spoken on a daily basis, Japanese and Filipino, a few phrases there will get you past all the different tourists. A lot of Filipino people there, especially on the side of the island I was. And my dad loves to have people come visit him at the farm. And he is one of the few native Hawaiian speakers left, knows all the history and stuff. So if you want like the actual Hawaiian experience, he loves to do it. He was a tour guide for many years. That's basically all I have. Thanks, I appreciate it. If anyone has any questions.
I got a question.
Sure.
So what was your monthly expenditure for having to do all like Wi-Fi hotspots, things like that, when you were trying to run a business?
So what was my monthly expenditure for doing all of those different types of things? So a lot of times I'd bill back to clients. The WiMAX stuff was right around $100 a month. VPS usually ran around $200 a month. So it wasn't super expensive to run all that stuff. And to this day, I still use the same techniques because of, being able to obfuscate where I come from. So I continue to use those things in my day-to-day job. Yes?
My question is about WiMAX. How many of the MP channels did WiMAX applicants supported the Hawaii one?
I have no idea, to be honest with you. WiMAX, like the implementation, kind of died out. Hawaii was the last holdout for WiMAX, and it's kind of gone away. So, yeah, I'm not sure. All I know is that the majority of the people I knew, they wouldn't get like Time Warner because it was like twice as expensive, and they would all use WiMAX. So I think that's why Sprint, when they came in and bought them, they're like, nope, we're gonna throttle everyone back down. You guys are using too much internet. Whereas the internet goes right through like Oahu. It comes in Pearl Harbor side and it goes out through the North Shore. Like, okay, we're right on the pipeline. Also, that's why NSA's big facilities are in Wahiawa as well as Honolulu. Like all the data goes right straight through there for Asia. Any other questions? All right, mahalo and aloha. Thank you very much.